what the hell is going on in Brazil?
This is how they're operating in the shadows. This is dictatorship. They've broken the law, definitely, and disrespected the Constitution.
And what have the consequences been for them?
Zero. I had to see it with my own two eyes, because you can't believe that this people is capable of doing it at this level, right?
How are they treating the people?
So many people are now afraid of speaking, of posting, going into self-censorship.
Wow.
This is how they persecute.
I thought things were bad in Britain. So what is this battle with Elon Musk?
Well, first of all, Elon Musk is seen as somebody who is a threat.
I've seen pictures of you surrounded by tens of thousands. You're a wildly popular free speech hero in Brazil, but you are now being persecuted by courts. Can you explain to me your specific story?
It's very difficult to explain, but the bottom line is, this is also a kind of a alert to everybody anywhere in the world, even in England. It's not that difficult to really have a tyrant or a tyranny that takes off your freedoms and makes your country become a dictatorship.
Before you hear from Marcel van Hattem, I ask, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press like and subscribe. If you do that, we're going to have more phenomenal guests like Marcel van Hattem exploring the issues that you at home want to hear about and that the mainstream media won't touch. But without further ado, Congressman Marcel van Hattem. Congressman Marcel van Hattem, I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you for coming in. Welcome to the show. There's lots to discuss. What the hell is going on in Brazil? I mean, it's in the news every day that Elon is having some sort of one-man battle against the whole country. I only just saw recently that the First Lady Lula's wife said F you on TV. But not only that, we've had the Brazil Twitter files. We've had this sort of bizarre power battle between Bolsonaro and Lula. There's so much going on. And I've got to be honest, I don't fully understand everything else. And what I'm very keen to get to is your personal persecution. You are a congressman on the run, not just a congressman, you're federal deputy. So this seems absolutely bizarre, particularly in this day of the suppression of free speech. So first of all, welcome to the show, Marcel.
Thank you. Thank you, Winston. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And especially thank you for giving the floor to the Brazilians, because we have problems in Brazil now with freedom of expression. And it's our responsibility also to go abroad and tell a little bit more about what's going on in Brazil.
Well, let me start with a broad, basic question.
Sure.
What is going on in Brazil?
Well, yeah. The thing is, I think all this social media trend that we see throughout the world, like more people having access to social media, more people expressing themselves, is annoying the elites in Brazil too. But we have something additional to that. We have a Marxist president back in power, Lula, who was in jail for almost 600 days in Brazil for corruption scandals. And we have a Supreme Court that is actually acting together with him. It's like a sort of a consortium. It's a Supreme Court that is not a legal body anymore. It's really a political body acting as if it was judicial. And they are working together to suppress the opposition, to limit the freedom of expression. And they say that it is because they want, to avoid the extremists to have their voice, as you have heard anywhere else in the world, also here in England, or the extreme right and so on. But in fact, what we see is that the system is trying to protect itself, be it because they want to remain in power, the Marxists, the socialists, be it because some of them are just profiting from it, from lack of transparency, corruption, schemes, and so on. So it's a whole lot going on in Brazil right now. But on the other hand, it's good to see that Brazil is big enough to call the attention to the world. So every country should be looking into what is going on in Brazil, because what happens in Brazil can happen to any other country in the world. That's what I would say. We're
having a similar thing here in Britain. And I'm also curious to ask about it in the context of the whole of Latin America. Of course, we have Javier Milei in Argentina and Bukele.
Big hope for us, actually.
Salvador, yeah. I'd love to get to that. But just before we do, let's just focus in on Brazil. So the political opponents of Lula, that is Bolsonaro is the famous one.
Sure.
You're head of the party, Partido Novo, excuse me. So you're not the same party as Bolsonaro.
No.
And how many different parties are there? What's the sort of broad painting you can paint?
We have about, in Congress, I'm not sure the exact figures, and that's also something noticeable when you don't know exactly, even though you're working in parliament, how many different parties are there, but there should be about 12, 13 different parties in the parliament. We were, in the beginning of 2019, at a number of 25 different parties. So the number of parties shrank meanwhile, and that's because several incentives have been cut in the last years for the existence of so many parties. But most of the parties are not really ideological parties, I would say. So we have Novo Party, that's very clearly ideological, classic liberal party, center, right of center party, my party. We have PL Party, that PL is Liberal Party, it's called Liberal Party, it's a party of Bolsonaro, but it's an older party in the Brazilian system. So it has some people who are more, traditional politicians there that really don't care much about ideology, but Bolsonaro and those who are members of the party because of Bolsonaro are on the right.
So Western mainstream media paints Bolsonaro as a sort of Trump-like figure, and they use the term Trump, I think, pejoratively.
Sure.
So it's not a compliment, obviously.
Yeah.
What's the truth about Bolsonaro?
Well, he's friends with Trump, that's for sure. They have bonds, they have ties. Bolsonaro has ties also with other leaders on the right, like Javier Milei in Argentina that you just mentioned. But they are different in many senses too. I mean, their backgrounds. Bolsonaro is not somebody from the private sector. He's actually somebody from the military. He's a captain of the Brazilian Armed Forces. He's been a member of parliament for 29 years before becoming president. Trump never ran for office before becoming the president of the United States. So there are some differences, but of course there are many things that they look alike, and they do alike too. Like Trump represents all this anti-establishment feeling and all this, anti-leftist, Marxist feeling that is very present in the United States society today. And Bolsonaro, the same. And Bolsonaro was actually famous during the 2015 and 16 demonstrations in Brazil against Dilma, who was a successor of Lula as president of Brazil, and suffered an impeachment. And then, during that period, millions took to the people to demonstrate. I was one of them. I was actually one of the organizers in my state. But there wasn't really a leader in the opposition. The opposition almost didn't exist. If we think about what was the allowed opposition in Brazil, was the Social Democrats. So we had Lula, the Marxist socialist in the left, and we had the Social Democrats of Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Alckmin, Serra, who were the opposition, but they are also leftist, Social Democrats. By the way, Alckmin, that ran against Lula in the past, is now his vice president. So you see how, the two different kinds of left were competing as if they were like opponents, but in fact, we didn't have an opposition in the right. And then Bolsonaro takes part in all these demonstrations and start to use social media very well, something that was completely new from 2013, 14 onwards, and becomes the president of Brazil in 2018, using social media a lot. And of course, because the population was very tired of the PT. One, we got the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff passed through the chamber and the Senate, and Lula was put in jail later because of the corruption scandals. And that was the year 2018. So he was put in jail in March 2018, just 6 months before the election. He tried to run from jail. The electoral court said he couldn't in August, more or less, and then he put another candidate, Lula, from jail. He supported another candidate that lost to Jair Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro was then elected president in October, after suffering also an attempt on his life in September 6th, which helped a lot in the sense that, he got media coverage that he didn't before because of this stabbing he received, but also because of all social media support that he had been gathering before.
So philosophically, he's conservative. How should we understand him?
Oh yeah, he's conservative, and
what does Brazilian conservatism look different to, say, British or American conservatism?
It looks very much alike, I would say. The only thing is Bolsonaro was not really that free marketeer before that political campaign. But he came to comprehend that he should have also more opinions on privatization, having less government in people's life when it comes to economy as well, not only in people's habits. And this is why he also had a advisor called Paulo Guedes that became later his Minister of Finance or Minister of Economics, and that helped him get to a broader audience in Brazil that wanted, less government, less Marxism and socialism, and more freedom in the market.
Okay, so can you take me to the Jan 6th of Brazil, which is Jan 8th, 2023.
Yes, oh yeah.
This is something
that's
again...
jumping 5 years in story.
Or maybe you can color me
2023, that's how long? Yes, 5 years after his election.
What are the important parts before the Jan 6th of Brazil? In forgive me for doing this turbocharged history.
No, it's good. It's good. It's
Brazilian
also,
politics.
For me, it's challenging too, as it is important for people abroad to understand what's going on, and trying to explain it like this is very important too. But yes, let's go back to 2018. So Bolsonaro is elected. He takes office January 1st. And the corruption scandals that put Lula in jail, all the businessmen that were collaborating with the justice and telling all the schemes that were, in place in Brazil, they started also to tell the press and the courts that there were justices involved in the corruption schemes. And one of those justices was Dias Toffoli, the president of Brazilian Supreme Court. That's very important to tell, because Dias Toffoli was the lawyer of the party of Lula and was his attorney when Lula was president of the Republic. Was appointed by Lula, I don't know exactly the year, but in his first term between 2003 and 2006 to become Justice of the Supreme Court. And in 2019, when Bolsonaro is president, he is involved in corruption schemes according to some of these whistleblowers that were being heard by the federal police and by the investigations. So what does Dias Toffoli do then? That's about April 2019. He orders to censor the magazine Cruzoé that put that covered this story, saying that Dias Toffoli, this justice, was implicated in corruption scandals. And this was at first something that the other media decided to challenge and to just say it was completely not right to censor a magazine. But afterwards, the Supreme Court continued to censor all news that were against, members of the judiciary, and starting to call them as fake news. And this is where also all this censorship starts in the judiciary in Brazil. Not only because they were combating fake news from Bolsonaro or the right, they actually used Bolsonaro as a sort of as an excuse to cover up their own corruption scandals that were being brought up to the media.
I see. Okay,
so this is what happened. Dias Toffoli decided to name Alexandre de Moraes, who is this justice who is now fighting with publicly with Elon Musk, to be the rapporteur of the fake news inquiry. But this inquiry has been used to not only to censor news on corruption concerning the Supreme Court justices, but also to persecute Bolsonaro supporters.
Okay, I see.
This is how it all started.
So it's really a way of trying to take out Bolsonaro, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Political sort of warfare.
In November that year, they decided that Lula could go out of jail because he was in jail for almost 2 years, and then they, gave him an habeas corpus. And later, because they were very afraid that all these corruption scandals could get to the Supreme Court justices, they started to nullify all other cases involving politicians and businessmen in this car wash operation that put Lula in jail, and that also resulted in a nullification of Lula's case. So he had not been acquitted, but his case was completely annulled or nullified. I don't know how you call it exactly in English, but they cancel it because it supposedly did not start in the right court. It shouldn't. Don't really tell where, but it should be judged by another court. But that was only an excuse, to allow Lula to run again and then run against Jair Bolsonaro in 2022.
Well, let's come back to just understand Bolsonaro's popularity.
Yeah.
Where's his base? Is it similar to Trump in that it's a sort of working people?
Working people who, make their lives honestly and that want, no government interference. People that are, believers, that go to churchgoers, people who are, basically the same kind of, support that Trump has, Bolsonaro has in Brazil as well.
And his unpopularity comes from both his success and is he kind of crass with his language?
Yeah, sometimes he, during the pandemics, he could have said some things differently. The whole thing about the vaccines, I understand that many people didn't want to take the vaccines. I think that's completely okay. People have to choose whatever they want to have in their bodies, but Bolsonaro went a little bit further than that, sometimes even kind of campaigning against the vaccines that the government was actually delivering to the population.
His own government.
His own government, yes, of course, because the vaccination was actually federal. So I think there were some mistakes that he did in the sense that, and that he actually recognized later. He acknowledged during the campaign, especially the second round. He said, "I'm sorry, in the video if I offended you somehow with some of my speeches." But it was mainly like talking, talking things that you wouldn't if you thought a little bit more before saying some things. But that is Bolsonaro too. It's his manners, it's the way he speaks.
Okay, so then what happened on January 8th, 2023? And is that important to this? I ask because I think it must be important to this.
Yeah, it's very important because actually what the media says, and especially Lula and the PT government, is that it was a attempted coup d'etat, right, in Brazil, January 8th. It was just 8 days after Lula took office. The thing is that after November 22, the election was in the end of October, the last Sunday of October. Just right after the election, many people were completely dissatisfied with the results. And that's just obvious. Many people were dissatisfied because, one, Bolsonaro lost. Two, Lula, the newly elected president, was somebody that was in jail, that was put again in the political arena by the Supreme Court. There was, during the political campaign, a lot of censorship going on against Bolsonaro supporters. For instance, newspapers couldn't say that Lula was friends with Ortega or with Maduro. And he was. He is, actually. He's been receiving Maduro in Brasilia. They couldn't say.
Why not?
Because the Supreme Court decided that it was defaming the candidate. So Gazeta do Povo, one of the mainstream media in Brazil, was not allowed to publish it. Actually, a story that they wrote about the friendships of Lula was taken down by the court. The court also censored a documentary called Who Ordered to Kill Bolsonaro? Quem mandou matar Bolsonaro? Of a independent media outlet called Brasil Paralelo. That was 1 week or 10 days maybe before the election. So no justice of the electoral court. That's something very specific in Brazil. We have an electoral court overseeing the whole election process. No justice has watched the documentary, but they decided that because it could hurt the candidate's reputation, this case Lula, it couldn't go. It couldn't be launched before or released before the election. Another case, a Supreme Court justice, a former Supreme Court justice that participated in the Lula case as a justice before he retired, Marco Aurélio Melo. He gave an interview and it was aired in the Bolsonaro TV program. We have TV programs for the candidates that are running in Brazil. He, in the interview to a journalist, said that the case of Lula had been annulled and that he was not acquitted, that it had just started from scratch, right? This interview was also censored by the electoral court and could not be aired anymore in Bolsonaro's TV program.
So
So the election somehow, it was not even. Not at all.
What are the laws on free speech in Brazil?
According to our constitution, we cannot have censorship.
Similar to the First Amendment in America?
Very similar. Yeah.
Okay, so they've broken...
Anonymity is prohibited, is what the constitution says, but yeah, they've broken the law, definitely, and disrespected the constitution.
And what have the consequences been for them? Having broken the law?
Zero, because those who can judge the Supreme Court justices are the senators. But the senators today in Brazil, at least most of them, are not doing their job. We have 31 senators in the opposition and 81 in total. So we have still 50 senators that are either siding with the court or not really doing their job in bringing these justices to the responsibility.
Because of political motivation.
Political motivation. Sometimes they are even accomplices because there's so much money going on there. I mean, there are many senators that have cases going on in the Supreme Court. And there's other thing. Senators and members of the chamber are judged by the Supreme Court. So because you can face trial, maybe a criminal trial like I'm facing now, I'm being politically persecuted. We can talk about this later. But I can only be prosecuted by the Supreme Court when I am a member of the chamber or a member of the Senate. Different than in many other countries, all members of the Brazilian Congress are judged by the Supreme Court. So many senators are also afraid because if they do something about the justice, maybe a justice can do something against them with even more strength.
Yeah, so it's the first time a Brazilian judge has ever ordered the investigation of a member of Congress for something he said in the chamber. That's what you're referring to, and I'm very keen to get into that. But I just want to color in a little bit more. I do want to ask about January
8th. Let's go there. So people were very dissatisfied, started to gather in front of the headquarters of the army in Brasilia, but also in many other places in the country. Many people thought that, demanding the army to do something because Article 142 of Brazilian Constitution says that if one of the powers act unconstitutionally, it is the army who has to, solve the situation. Many people had this, idea that maybe the army could do something because so many unlawful things, unconstitutional things were done by the court in order for Lula to be elected, that maybe in these months remaining until Lula was in office, and that would happen in the 1st of January, maybe the army could do something. And I said very clearly, hey, don't do that. If you want change, you have to protest in front of parliament, or you have to call your representative, your senator, not asking the army to do anything. I was very clear about that the army wouldn't do anything. But many people didn't hear, and most politicians didn't say anything. They were just, silent about it all, because when people are crowding like this in front of headquarters of army and around the country, it's very difficult for a politician to say, don't do that, because it's going against the tide. And Bolsonaro decided to travel to the United States on the 30th of December. He just left the country. He said he wouldn't pass power to Lula. Lula would just receive, because he wouldn't, basically he said, I will not, pass on the power to a thief. That's what basically Bolsonaro said. And he decided to go to America, and he was there during the events of January 8th. The people continue to be in front of the army headquarters in Brasilia and other places. And in that day, in the January 8th, somebody, I don't know exactly how that happened, but started to call for a demonstration in front of the houses of Congress, in front of the Supreme Court and the Planalto Palace. And that was a Sunday. I mean, if you want to really perform a coup d'etat, you won't do it on a Sunday. All these people that were in the headquarters, they had been peaceful throughout the last years of protests. So it wasn't an intention to really invade these places. But what I do believe happened, and what speaking to many people who were there, I hear, is that there were people probably infiltrated, or some that were just, too excited about all this, movement going towards this Three Powers Plaza, as we call it, the Praça dos Três Poderes. Some of these people just decided to start, invade and say, now we're taking over, or whatever, by the excitement. I believe that there were people, yes, infiltrated. The left is very good in doing it, like insufflating people to walk towards the buildings. And what I also see, there were many people, and the video showed that many people that were there on site demanding those who were, breaking things and so on, demanding them not to do that, to stop it. The video showed that many people just say, hey, we're not here for violence, don't do that. And the government should be prepared for that, and they received documents from at least 40 different departments within the government warning that something could happen on Sunday, and the government didn't do anything. Worse than that, the government not only didn't do anything, the federal government, Lula's government, the Minister of Justice, who is now actually a justice in the Supreme Court too, appointed by Lula, he said he saw everything from the window of his office. What was this guy doing there on a Sunday afternoon? Second, he was just watching, but they demanded the police, the National Guard, to do something only after everything was, being broken. And third, when we demanded the videos 2 or 3 months later during a parliamentary inquiry that was being conducted in Congress, he said that the images were all deleted. So we didn't have the images from his own office, or what he was doing inside, or what was going on around the area of the Minister of Justice, as we call it, that is just a few meters away from Congress. So it's all it's very difficult to explain the whole thing. But the bottom line is, many people who were put in jail on the next day. Some of them were really caught inside the buildings. There are cases of people who were just protecting themselves because, police came later and they wanted to take shelter somewhere. And they would put in jail for months without any accusation, nothing. No individual cases were open. It was like all of them were put together in kind of the same case before the court, and remained in jail for months and months. And many people were actually put in prison just the next day. That is, some arrived after the events in Brasilia, because, as I was telling, many people were coming and going to the headquarters, right? So many arrived only Sunday evening, and Monday in the morning, there were buses aligned in front of the headquarters of the army. That's about 3 kilometers away from the place of the events. People were ordered to go into the buses. Nobody was told that they were going to be sent to prison. Really something disgraceful. And they were sent to the federal police, and from there to jail where common criminals are also put in Brasilia. More than 1,000 people. People that weren't even in the site of events. So it was completely political for most part. And even those who did do something, who broke things, and I'm always against violence, from the left or from the right, they are now receiving 17 years of jail because of supposedly attempting against, the rule of law or democracy. There's even a mother of 2 who just wrote with lipstick on the statue, Perdeu Mané, which is a sentence that one of the justices said about Bolsonaristas or Bolsonaro supporters, that mean you lost, man. And he said so once, and he was caught on video, like provoking a Bolsonarista. She wrote that with a lipstick on the statue that is in front of the Supreme Court. She still in jail. She can't see her children, and she's receiving a 17 years jail conviction. It's crazy.
Was she legally allowed to be?
Yes.
She didn't break into any...
No, she just... I can send you the picture. You can put on the video here. It would be interesting to see. It's just like with lipstick. It's clean. And you don't see anything.
The conviction is for specifically vandalizing the statue.
Well, yes, but then they put also together that she tried to attempt a coup d'etat, that she was together in action with other criminals against democracy and so on. So this is how they do it.
Is it okay? Just on the motivations of those rioters, they obviously must have thought that it was an illegitimate election.
Sure.
What were the questions of legitimacy around that? You said earlier Bolsonaro said that Lula was a thief. That's why he left. What is it? Was it the election itself? Was it? Can you explain to me what's going through these people's
many
heads?
things together? So yes, Lula is a thief, and he was released from jail, and injustice in some. So people look at that and see, look, this guy has been convicted by several different judges in the local courts, in the regional courts, even in the national court, and then he's allowed to run, and he wins the election. This is completely wrong. He should be in jail. That's one. Second, the way the election was conducted, right? So as I told you, like censorship against Bolsonaro supporters and against Bolsonaro and not against Lula. Third, during Bolsonaro government, justices have also issued many different decisions against Bolsonaro's ability to do things that he should be able to do as a president. Like he wanted to put somebody as his minister of justice. There was an order by the Supreme Court saying he couldn't because this guy was his friend or whatever was the reason. I mean, the Constitution says very clearly that he can name whoever he wants as a minister of justice. But Bolsonaro said, okay, then I'm not doing. So he actually complied to most of the unconstitutional decisions of the Supreme Court. And there was also something that I cannot talk about because I will lose my social media in Brazil if I do that. If I say that I think the election was rigged in Brazil, was stolen, because we vote with electoral machines.
That was my next question.
Yeah. If I say so, if I say that I happen to have this opinion and I post on my social media this opinion, I'm going to be, by the Supreme Court justices, erased from social media. They will block down my social accounts. So nobody in Brazil is allowed to question the voting machines. If you question the voting machines, if you say anything about it, even if you ask questions about it, they will say that you are doubting the electoral system, doubting democracy, and then you have to be put offline. And they will issue orders to Facebook, to Instagram, to X to censor you. And that happened even with members of parliament who were elected after the Brazilian elections 2022.
Who thought it was illegitimate?
Yes, there were some members of parliament because Bolsonaro started the whole thing, questioning the machines, right? Because the machines don't print out the vote. So, for instance, in Venezuela, you have the voting machines, but you have, even in Venezuela, the system is better than in Brazil, right? Even in Venezuela. So, there are, like Paraguay, you vote in the electronic machine, but then you get a receipt of your vote, and this receipt, because without you touching it, goes to the box. And it can be later, you can compare what is in the box with what the machine says. In Brazil, you type in the machine and you trust the machine is okay. So the only thing you get before starting the machine, those who are sitting on the table, who are like the president of the session and their secretaries, who are, ordinary citizens who are volunteers there, you get a paper from the ballot box or the electronic machine saying that it has 0 votes, right? So after everybody has voted there, they get a new bulletin, as we call it, bulletin de urna, with the number of votes each candidate got, right? I was elected with that, indeed, people who say, why Bolsonaro is doubting it, because he was elected with that many times as member of parliament. He was elected as president, and now he's doubting the system. So the court said that this system can be changed. We tried to change in Parliament. I'm still in favor of changing it to having this paper vote with it. You print it, period, done. I'm still in favor of that because it's not about I trust or I don't trust. If there are enough people who don't trust, you should do something to make your system better so that less people, distrust it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no 100% secure system anywhere in the world. I mean, fraud occurs anywhere. I'm sure they're frauding some votes, even in England, in some places. That's unfortunately how it works. I mean, you have to trust that at least like 95, 98, 99% of the votes are, exactly what people wanted them to be. But if you don't trust the system, or if there's a huge number of people, like 20%, 30% of the population, say, I don't trust the system, you have to do something about it. This is why I was in favor of changing it. But 1 year before the election, if I'm not mistaken, 1 year and a half, we tried to pass a constitutional amendment to change the voting system only to include the votes printed on paper. The Supreme Court interfered in the legislature, talked with the president of the main parties. In my opinion, they put pressure on that. I was not in that meeting, but yes, they and my party was also not represented. But the main parties, the big parties, my party has only 3 representatives out of 513. So the president of the court at the time, the electoral court, Luis Roberto Barroso, sat in a table like that with all members of party. That's public. It's in the press, saying that there was no need. That was too much money, to print all these votes. This was only a way to give Bolsonaro more power and all his, conspiracy theories around it. Please don't vote in favor of that. And indeed, we lost the vote.
And Bolsonaro wasn't in that meeting?
No. But unfortunately, the Speaker of the House worked to defeat this proposal. I think if this proposal was not defeated, we would have less problems. And I'm not saying that the results are not trustworthy. I'm just saying that if we did have like the printing, the printing of the votes, there would be less space or speculation, even from Bolsonaristas or from Bolsonaro himself.
Right.
And the thing is, when he was grown suspicious about the system, he gathered ambassadors from different countries in the Planalto Palace when Bolsonaro was president. This is very important to tell too. So he called ambassadors to go to the Planalto Palace. I don't know how many were there, maybe 30, 40, I'm not sure, to tell about the system and say that the election could be rigged with these voting machines, because these voting machines were only used, if I'm not mistaken, in Djibouti and one other country. I mean, like Bangladesh, I think. The only 3 countries in the world that use this kind of machines: Brazil, Bangladesh, and Djibouti, something like that. Yeah,
not great.
Not great examples, exactly. Well, Germany has ruled unconstitutional to use any voting machines, electronic voting machines. The Netherlands tried once and said we don't want it anymore. So there's reason for being suspicious if you want, and there's reason to trust them. So you see how careful I am when I talk about it. I don't want to
be in trouble.
I don't want my media to be put down, right? So, but anyway, that's my opinion, and I continue to give my opinion that we should have printing votes. But the bottom line is, so Bolsonaro asked his ambassadors to go there. They went there, and now after Bolsonaro left office, the electoral court, which is by part. The electoral court has 7 justices. 4 of them are from the Supreme Court too. So it's actually a part of the Supreme Court. They decided that Bolsonaro, when he had this meeting with the ambassadors, he attacked Brazilian democracy by, speculating about the election results like he did, and therefore he's now ineligible to become president again or to become candidate in the next election. So Bolsonaro is out of the game until further notice. Of course, he's appealing to the same court, because the appeal is in the Supreme Court, waiting for an answer. But until further notice, he is out of the game. He cannot run because he gathered all these ambassadors to, throw some suspicion on the electoral process in Brazil.
And when's the next election?
26.
26. Okay. So it's not out of the question that he returns somehow.
He's still campaigning. I mean, he continues, and he just gave an interview saying that he's the candidate in the next election. So, and it must be said that he's the most popular leader in the Brazilian right. That's for sure. He's the only one that can still, gather millions of people if he asks to take to the streets like he did last September. To protest against the blocking of X in Brazil.
Okay, yeah. And Lula can't do that.
No.
Lula doesn't have that sort of popularity. Okay, so this is a very helpful background. You've painted a beautiful picture.
Not so beautiful, but
I think it's helpful framing to then look at your situation and, of course, what Elon Musk has to do of all of this. Why you've been with Michael Schellenberger, a friend of this show.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of you surrounded by tens of thousands. You're a wildly popular free speech hero in Brazil, but you are now being persecuted by courts. Can you explain to me your specific story?
Sure. Well, there are two stories, or many, but two that are more important about my case. So first of all, Michael Schellenberger, he started to cover Brazil more recently with the Twitter files. So the Twitter files that are there, and revealed many other cases around the world, had also a specific group of emails about censorship going on in Brazil. And that was before Lula and Bolsonaro election and after. Before also Elon Musk buying Twitter. Right, so Elon Musk opened the files and say, whoever wants, you can gather, the information here. So Michael Schellenberger got this information from X headquarters and worked together with two Brazilians, David Agape and Eli Vieira Jr., two journalists, and they found in these Twitter files many examples of legal representatives of Twitter at the time trying to avoid blocking people on Twitter because of Supreme Court justices' illegal orders. So that was very interesting to see how this, took place in the backstage. Yes?
Yes. So,
for instance, many politicians, and not only politicians actually, but also politicians like me, received legal orders or X received legal orders to put down their profiles or posts without any due process, anything, like the Supreme Court justice. And later Glenn Greenwald reviewed a series of WhatsApp messages exchanged between the assistants of Judge Alexandre de Moraes, who is the censorship judge in Brazil at the moment. The same that was a rapporteur of Dias Toffoli case on corruption, as I told you before, in 2019. So this same man is working on censorship of X, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And in these emails, you can see many times he orders without any due process, without anything, just because he received a message from an assistant, as we later found out from these WhatsApp messages that Glenn Greenwald exposed, ordering, to censor a page, a profile, and so on. So in my case, there was a video that I recorded just 2 days before the campaign that was not even against the electoral system or the voting machines, was against the labor prosecutor in Brazil. There's an instance of the federal prosecution system, I don't know how you call it in English, but that is specific on labor issues. And I was, in my video, criticizing the fact that they were trying to impose fines on businessmen that were campaigning for Bolsonaro, for instance, inside their companies. And these labor prosecutors would say, if you continue to campaign for Bolsonaro in your company, in your business, we're going to impose you huge fines. And I said that was harassment, because, if you have a business and you want to tell your employee that if Bolsonaro wins, consequence is A. if Lula wins, consequence is Venezuela or B, whatever, right? So why aren't you supposed to be able to do so? So I was criticizing it, and Alexandre de Moraes decided that this was unlawful, this was against democracy, and that my video should be put down. It is censored until this day.
So this is the end of 2022?
This is the end of 2022.
Okay.
But that was after the election. So they decide to censor me. The video was recorded on Friday, election was on Sunday, but the decision to take down my video was only made on Tuesday, after the election. So the video was also useless at that time for any, campaign purpose. And still they decided to censor the video. But there's worse going on, because then when we see the Twitter files, the emails exchanged inside, right, the company, the guy said, it's just crazy what's going on, because they answer the court saying, look, this video you're saying that Marcel posted, he did post on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, but he did not post on X. I did not post that video, that very specific video on X. So, you know what the justice replies? No, I'm not telling you to take the video down. Take the whole thing down, the whole profile. So I was being,
all your social media,
my whole X profile. So my video wasn't even posted on X, but Justice Alexandre de Moraes ordered to put down my whole profile.
But that's insane.
Censored. It is insane, but that's what's going on in Brazil.
What date was that? Because Elon bought Twitter at the end of 22.
That was in the end of 22, in the beginning of November. I learned about this case first because YouTube sent me the court's decision. But
YouTube did?
YouTube did. The only medium. I mean, X did not, Facebook did not. YouTube just sent me, look, this is the decision. We have to put down this video. That was 1 week, not even after the elections. And then I knew about it. But on the other hand, actually, YouTube shouldn't have sent it to me. You know why? Because all these cases are also under secrecy. They're actually clandestine cases. They do it without, you can't have a lawyer because you don't know why you're being, persecuted. I had only full access to the case, to every file, 6 months afterwards, after YouTube sent me that one email. And I only knew the whole story after Michael Schellenberger posted the Twitter files. This is how they're operating in the shadows.
Wow.
This is dictatorship.
Huh. A short interruption to your interview. If you want to find exclusive content, exclusive videos, and exclusive interviews, The Winston Marshall Show, come over to our Substack. On our Substack, you'll be able to interact with me in ways that you can't on other platforms, and you'll find it all at winstonmarshall.co.uk. But back to the interview. So,
yeah,
there's two other cases, though, of your persecution.
Yeah.
One of them is you defending another member of, have I got this right? You defending Felipe Martins.
Yeah.
Is that a separate story?
Yes.
Okay, so can you take me through that situation?
Sure. So Felipe Martins is an assistant or a former assistant of Jair Bolsonaro. He was his special advisor for international relations. Very intelligent guy. He traveled the world with Bolsonaro, was with him in the General Assemblies of the UNs, and so on. So he was a guy that was really right hand of Bolsonaro when it came to international relations. He served the government until the very last day, 31st of December. Bolsonaro went on the 30th, as I told, to the United States. He didn't want to be in Brazil when Lula took office. Felipe Martins decided to stay in Brazil. He was invited by Bolsonaro to go in the plane, and he said, no, I have my family here, New Year's time, I'm staying. Okay. February 2024, 1 year and 2 months later, Felipe Martins is visited by the police in his place. They order his cell phone. They order, to make a search in his place and take him to jail. Why? Because according to the federal police in Brazil, their reports, Felipe Martins was implicated in the attempted coup d'etat Like it's a very childish narrative, but they say that he was implicated in the attempted coup d'etat of January 8th
Yeah.
with Bolsonaro, or before that even, because he had allegedly write a sort of a coup minute, right? That they found in a Bolsonaro office, like a minute telling how the coup was going to be done. Well, on these allegations, he was put in jail, but not only because he supposedly or allegedly had written that, but also because he had traveled with Bolsonaro to Florida in the end of 2022, and he could escape again if he stayed in Brazil and was not sent to jail. But he did not go with Bolsonaro in this October 30th trip. So they used actually a draft passengers list that was found with another Bolsonaro assistant to suggest that Felipe Martins had traveled together with Bolsonaro. That draft was draft number 7. There were 15 lists of passengers, because when the president travels, his staff organizes the list. So list number 1, list number 2, until the final list. He was not in the last 4 passengers list, 12, 13, 14, 15. I saw all this data, I saw the evidence and so on. And his defenders, his lawyers sent to the prosecutor general also proved that he was in Brazil. He had plane tickets of airplanes he flew in Brazil during that period. He had his cell phone data showing that he was, in Brazil. So the antennas were showing, the companies showing that he was in Brazil and so on. So he had all proven evidence that he was not, he did not go with Bolsonaro. So the prosecutor general, about 3 weeks after his imprisonment, sent Alexandre de Moraes, the justice that, based on this police report, ordered his incarceration. The prosecutor general says, look, release him, because this is no ground for maintaining him in prison. Instead of releasing him, Alexandre de Moraes asked the federal police agents to provide new evidence. And they do. First, they come up with a travel history, saying that he indeed had flown with Bolsonaro because the CBP in Orlando put in his travel history. That's actually a public document. Anyone who's watching can go to the travel history of the Americans, of the United States. You go there, CBP travel history. You found every travel you did, every trip you did to the United States. Very interesting. I didn't even know. But even trips that you checked in and you didn't make are there. That is why this page disclosed that you cannot use that data for legal purposes. Even so, the police did. So the lawyers of Felipe Martins sent an email to the CBP in Orlando to correct the information. Say, look, we don't know what's going on. He's in jail. He's unjustly in jail. He never did that trip, but it's in the travel history that he traveled to Orlando. How is that possible? So the CBP in Orlando first answers saying that, yes, you're right. The last I-94 registration, and this is the official entry into the United States, is of September 2022. This is when Felipe Martins went to the United Nations General Assembly together with Bolsonaro. And that was through JFK. So go to JFK to have the information, but here in Orlando, he did indeed not enter in December 2022. So they send this information to the media, and the media say, CBP in Orlando reviews that Felipe Martins did not travel with Bolsonaro. To their surprise, after that, the federal police comes with a new report with the I-94 in his diplomatic passport, in his files at the CBP, but the passport they use is a passport that had been stolen before that alleged trip, and that was actually canceled. So they sent a new email to CBP. Hey, this is crazy. What's going on? I mean, he didn't do this trip, but if he had done, this is his real passport, his valid passport. This other was canceled. The CBP in Orlando just replies, oh, we're going to correct this information. You know what they do? They use the attachment and they replace the canceled passport by the new passport and put even so the I-94. So they go all the way to the DHS, and then to make this very long story short, the information is finally corrected. He's released from jail, but he spent 6 months of his life in jail for this report done by a federal police agent with false information. Brazilian federal police agent that, I don't know, I'm not accusing, but, the evidence is there, has probably been working together with some corrupt official in the United States, because there's no other way somebody in the CBP in Orlando would put a false I-94 entry, right, that has faked this information. Mary O'Grady wrote about this story, Michael Schellenberger as well. Mary O'Grady was the first international journalist to cover that for the Wall Street Journal, and very good story. So when do I come into the story?
But wait, do we have any more of a clue about what the American interference was, or is it just a mystery?
It is a mystery so far, but now that Trump is president, we expect that the new DHS will go into a full investigation to find out who did that. Somebody must have done it. I mean, somebody in the CBP in Orlando, most probably, or in the DHS in Washington, we don't know, had faked this information, had built up all this, and we have to know who did that, with what purpose, and if it really was in coordination with the Brazilian Federal Police and with Justice Alexandre de Moraes to maintain somebody in prison for 6 months, and probably because they just wanted him to collaborate. And, they were expecting, in my opinion, and that's something that I heard from other people, they were expecting that Felipe Martins would just, speak up about the attempted coup that they say that Bolsonaro tried to give, and, to make him another collaborator of justice, something that he refused to do because it's all, false narrative, and he decided to just remain quiet. But he was put in jail for 6 months, even in a solitaire for 11 days. It's crazy what they did to this guy in Brazil.
Yeah.
And he's still forbidden to give any interviews. He cannot leave his home. He's still at home arrest, basically, because he cannot, during the weekends, go out. He can only go out during the day. In the evenings, he had to stay at home. He has in his ankle this monitoring system, So he cannot give interviews. I say it twice because he asked to give interview, and we are going to receive him next week. If the court doesn't block it, we hope not, but I approved a special request in the Foreign Affairs Committee for him to testify before Congress and tell more about his story. It's crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I want to, we'll come back to your involvement,
Yes.
but so are you suggesting that the American establishment, maybe the Biden-Harris administration,
yes,
are involved?
definitely.
What's your thoughts?
I'm not only, yes, I'm suggesting, but more than that, I'm it's so difficult, actually, because I had to see it with my own 2 eyes, because you can't believe that these people is capable of doing it at this level, right? Because you would expect somebody to defraud documents, to try at least to do it in a careful manner, in a way that you would not, suspect or see such a big flaw, like putting a invalid passport, a canceled passport in it. And it's really unbelievable in a sense, but I believe it because I saw it with my own 2 eyes.
And
now I was this last week in the United States, before coming here, talking also with representatives, with future members of Trump government to raise this issue, but also other members of parliament are doing that now.
And why would the American administration be interfering in this way? Is it anti-Bolsonaro?
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons. I mean, there is already evidence that also the Biden administration helped to some extent Lula to become president with the funding of NGOs that are against Bolsonaro and so on, and all this public speech against him, and how they have been sponsoring it, not only in Brazil, but around the world. But in this case specifically, we must go further down to the local level to see if there is maybe somebody in the CBP in Orlando that is doing this kind of, dirty job for the PT party, for Lula's party in Brazil, and also for Justice Alexandre de Moraes. We will find out. I'm pretty confident about it. And this is why I'm now being persecuted, because I told about this story in the House floor, and I told
In Brazil.
That was on Wednesday. I visited Felipe Martins after 6 months. He was released from jail on Friday. I arrived at his place midnight from Sunday to Monday. I stayed up all night with him, his wife, and two friends, one of which is taking care also of this case. And we were the whole night reviewing all information from Sunday to Monday. Wednesday, I was in the parliament, and I went to the Tribune. I spoke about it. And the next day, as now I know because I received the inquiry, the federal police agent, whose name is Fábio Schor, who is the guy who did the report, I lifted his image and his photo, his picture, and I held it in my hands until the end of my speech. This guy offered what we call a representation. That is, he started a case against me in the Supreme Court for offending him, right? I just told the story as I'm telling you here, of course, shorter because I didn't have that much time in the Tribune. And the Supreme Court Justice Flávio Dino, instead of looking at it and saying, I think that actually is deserving an investigation of the federal police himself, because that's a member of Congress saying that this case is, completely a suspicious one. No, he decided to open the investigation against me. And I was in my right to make, any speech I wanted. This is a right that any member of Congress has since 1689 here in England with the Bill of Rights.
Huh.
I mean, if you're a member of Congress and you cannot speak, why am I still, in Congress? This is just, it doesn't go together.
Okay, so that's why you're being persecuted, because you're speaking up for
this case.
Yeah. And now I've understood as well that and this is what Schellenberg has published in public, is that you've been accused of spreading election misinformation. Is this a separate story?
This is the first one I was telling about. About the labor prosecutor, and but this is also an example of how lame their decisions are, because they really don't even look much into it. They just said election misinformation. What kind of election misinformation I was spreading? I was just criticizing a government organ, bureaucrats who were trying to impose fines on businessmen who were talking about politics with their employees. That's all.
Yeah. So, I mean, if this is how they
anything is electoral disinformation for these guys, right?
If this is how they treat their political oppositions, how are they treating the people, the ordinary people? Presumably
even worse in that sense, yeah. So many people are now afraid of speaking, of posting, going into self-censorship. And I thought you were going to ask how they are treating the leftist, which is also a good question, right?
Yeah.
Leftists can say whatever they want. I mean, they called Bolsonaro because of the pandemic, so they made a big issue about his treatment of the pandemic. They would be calling him genocide, or genocidal. How you call it? Genocidal? Yeah, all the time. And nobody ever got, any punishment for that. I mean, and that's free speech, right? So it's disgusting because it's ridiculous to call someone like Bolsonaro a genocidal. But they did it, and now they continue, to defame rightists. There are many politicians in the left that call us fascists or whatever, really offend us, but to them, nothing happens. But we have to face all kind of censorship by the Supreme Court and punishment.
So the issues being censored, it's political stuff, like you described. But what we've seen here in Britain and also in America is issues like the trans issue, COVID.
Same.
So much censored. So what are the other topics that are being censored in Brazil?
Well, COVID, same. I mean, same that we saw everywhere in the world. We had in Brazil too. We couldn't really post, but that was not only government. That was also the social media they were all putting people on shadow ban that would, talk about COVID or with a more, anti-vax opinion. About trans, it's also something now. For instance, in Brazil, we have a law defining racism to be a crime, right? This a crime in Brazil to be racist. So the Supreme Court decided by a ruling of theirs that if you're homophobic with somebody, this equals to the crime of being racist. It was not legislated. It was not something that the parliament decided. This is how grave the situation is, and I'm not going into the the subject itself. It's just like the way they're doing it. The Supreme Court is deciding stuff that should be decided, if so, by the members of parliament. And now in Brazil, if you are homophobic in the understanding of a court, you can be convicted with the same jail punishment as being racist.
Has anyone been convicted of that?
Oh yeah. Even people have been convicted, and also members of parliament have been subject to that. Another thing that happened
members of parliament have been convicted for being homophobic.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is Nicolas Ferreira. He during Women's Day, he's the most voted member of the chamber in Brazil in the last elections. Got more than 1.5 million votes. So he did a speech on March 8th, 2023. He took office in February together with me, and during that speech, that was Women's Day, he decided to put a wig to pretend he's, a trans something, and saying how these people are, taking how trans are taking women's places in sports and blah, blah, blah. So this speech is now subject to a
criminal investigation?
An investigation, indeed, yeah, because a leftist started a case against him in the Supreme Court for homophobia. He is also being investigated for
homophobia or transphobia.
Well, transphobia in that case, you're right, probably, yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, I do not know the details of that case, but that's going on in Brazil too. The same guy, Nicolas Ferreira, he was at the United Nations earlier this year, and he called Lula a thief there. So, which is completely true. I mean, he is a thief, and he was convicted for being a thief in the past. But they started the case against him, and now the same thing that's happening to me with this prosecution in the Supreme Court is happening to him.
For calling him a thief?
For calling him a thief in the United Nations. And they offered him, I don't know what kind of agreement, and he said, I'm not agreeing with anything. But what is their objective in the end? Because in Brazil, there's another law that says that if you are convicted in the Supreme Court, no matter for what criminal offense, if you're convicted, if you murder somebody or if you just offended something, but if it is a criminal offense and you are convicted in the Supreme Court, you stay ineligible for 8 years. So it means that if they criminally convict me for this speech that I gave in Parliament in the next months, I will stay 8 years ineligible and I will not be able to run again as a member of Parliament or senator or whatever I want.
Wow.
This is how they persecute.
I thought things were bad in Britain, but what you've been going through, oh my goodness. So,
and the worst part is that we are being actually judged or by the guys that are suspected of having been involvement in corruption scandals, right? And one thing that is even more shocking, maybe for those who believe in justice and the rule of law, is that last year, the justice gathered, the justices in Brazil, the members of the Supreme Court, to decide that the law that stated that spouses and children of justices could not come before the court as lawyers, they judged that this law is unconstitutional. Therefore, if you want to win a case in the Supreme Court, you can hire the spouse, the wife, or the husband, because there's also a woman who's a justice, or their children who happen to be lawyers, to be your advocate, to be your lawyer in front of the court.
Wow.
Isn't there any conflict of interest there?
So, enter Elon Musk.
Okay.
Is this an appropriate time to bring him in? Because obviously you've brought him up already.
Yeah.
The Twitter files and him changing it. But about this mid-2020, was it earlier 2024 or end of 2023 when we see Elon openly attacking the Brazilian government?
It starts with the Twitter files, really.
End of 22?
April 23.
Okay.
This year. Oh, sorry, we're 24. No, yes. 2024.
Oh, this year. Okay.
This year, April.
So they obviously...
It's quite recent.
It's quite recent, but they have... We've already mentioned earlier how President Lula's wife is publicly saying she's not scared of Elon Musk. Bizarre statement in itself. Like, why would she be scared of him? Why would she feel the need to say that she's not scared of him?
Because she is.
Quite.
Right.
And saying F you, and they froze Starlink's assets. So what is this battle with Elon Musk?
Well, first of all, Elon Musk is seen as somebody who is a threat to the left, right? Or to the left, right? So because he's giving voice to everybody in his platform, from the left to the right. But the left wants to censor those who disagree with them. So when the Twitter files came out and demonstrated how X was operating before Elon Musk, and how, more specifically, Alexandre de Moraes was ordering like the closing down of accounts and censoring of posts, Elon Musk started also to come to the public. And first, he promised to unblock everybody from Twitter. So when he did that,
which would be illegal in Brazil.
Well, it would be legal, but it would be illegal under the eyes of the justices, right? Because they are the law now. They are the constitution, right? They
would deem it
beyond
illegal.
it. They would, yes, and then these justices, they were actually, especially Alexandre de Moraes, because they give interviews to the press all the time. They were saying that this would be how do you say that this would be illegal, would be unconstitutional, he couldn't do that, and so on. And he didn't do it immediately. So he said in a tweet that he would, restore all the blocked accounts. He did not do in the first weeks. And then the situation settled again for a time until closer to the election, around, it was the month of August. Alexandre de Moraes came up with a justification, with a excuse to block down the whole Twitter in Brazil, saying that because Twitter didn't have a legal representative in Brazil, or legal representation, and they were trying to find a lawyer, and the lawyer would never be able to receive, I don't know who, from justice that had the orders to do whatever, a fine or whatever it was, I don't remember exactly. If Twitter wouldn't appoint who the legal representative was, the Brazilian justice would order it to be completely shut down for the population. Yeah. And they also threatened the legal representative of Twitter of jail, right? If they didn't comply with the measures that the judge had put in his decision. So what does Elon Musk does? He just fires everybody in Brazil. He closed down the office. Yeah, right. He had all these people there, and these people are under threat of even going to jail. He said, no, I don't want anybody to go to jail. So in order to protect all these guys, he just fires everybody and said, I don't have anybody anymore in Brazil. I'm closing down my office. So next thing...
which actually is not a bad thing to do, except that...
No, I think it's the reasonable thing to do. I mean, if you see an illegal order in a country, I don't remember, but it's something between 20 and 30 people, not that many.
Okay.
Not that many. So the office of Twitter is not that big in Brazil, but they have their representatives. But imagine, the guy is the richest man in the world. He has so many other countries to deal with. And then he received a legal order from Brazil, from a court, saying, if you don't comply with this unjust, illegal orders, I'm going to put your representative in jail. What does he do? He just fires everybody to protect these guys. He said, if I don't want to comply with the legal orders, but this guy will go to jail if I don't do so, so I fire him. That's what he did. Next thing Elon Musk receives is another legal order of Alexandre de Moraes saying, if you don't have a representative in Brazil, if you don't hire somebody again, if you don't comply with my measures, I'm going to shut down the whole thing, and I'm going to fine everybody in Brazil who uses Twitter for $10,000 a day for every post people do in Brazil, even with VPN. That's in his order too.
How many people use Twitter?
20 million, 22 million. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a popular app. That's a big app.
It is quite popular.
Is it the main app of that sort of communication?
that sort of communication for sure. Of course, Instagram and Facebook have more users, but for that sort of communications, Twitter, yeah.
Okay, so he says he's going to...
And all journalists are there. Everybody's there, right?
Right.
But he puts also... So Alexandre de Moraes decides that. But in his decision, he also says, the decision to close down Twitter in the end, that he's doing it because it is during the electoral campaign. And he's doing it fast because during the periculum in mora is how do you say in law, because if he doesn't do it immediately, extremist speech and so on can be spread even more on Twitter, and Twitter isn't doing anything to contain it. So in the end, it's very clear that the decision to deprive Brazilian citizens of having Twitter was political. And after the first round of the elections in Brazil, like 2 or 3 days later, Twitter is restored. So first, 2 weeks before Elon Musk say, okay, I'm complying, he starts to, and that's where Starlinks come in, right? He says, I'm going to pay the fines because first, what does Moraes do? And everything is unlawful. He said, like, it's $10 million fine. But where does he get these numbers from? Nobody knows. He just decides, $10 million fines. X doesn't have representation in Brazil anymore. So we're taking it from Starlink. Starlink is another business. I mean, Elon Musk is the founder. He has a lot to do with Starlink, and we know that. But it's another business. You can't, under Brazilian law and also under any reasonable rule of law system, to get money from one company to cover the fines that are applied on another company. But he does that too. Huh. And then finally, Musk says, okay, I'm complying. The explanation we received in the opposition from him, he had a long telephone call with one of the leaders of our opposition, is that he had to restore Twitter or X because X not functioning in Brazil is like a body without oxygen. It needs oxygen, otherwise it would, die in a few months with no people involved in it and with no activity. So, but he decides to collaborate like 2 weeks before the election. But then Alexandre de Moraes keep asking for new bureaucracy and new things only to make, his decision be worth after the elections are over. So that especially we on the right, or us, for the Novo Party, small party, so that we don't have Twitter to use it to campaign for our candidates.
Okay, so then back to your story.
And this all helps Lula, of course, in the end, right?
Well, of course.
The president, who was deemed in Europe and in the United States and everywhere in the world like the savior of democracy because Bolsonaro was so bad, right?
I think there's been worldwide revolts and a turning against a globalist worldview. Mm-hmm. A globalist worldview that you might say is encapsulated by Schwabism and Davos and the WEF. Yeah. There's lots of different every country has its own disparate stories when it comes to their populist movement against the establishment. But some things unite all of them. And I wondered, is Lula part of that same worldview of a sort of globalist, socialist?
Yeah, well, definitely. Yes, he is.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, and he's celebrated by all these, people.
So in the same way that maybe the Democrat establishment are in America,
yes.
It's open borders, it's against sovereignty, basically.
Well, yes, and at the same time, I mean, we were forbidden to say that he was friends with Ortega and Maduro, remember that? So now who's he siding with? He's siding with China, he's siding with Hamas.
How has he sided with Hamas?
Well, when the war broke in Israel, he first, sent his solidarity to Israelis that were, killed, kidnapped, and so on. But after the response of Israel, he gave a very terrible speech that went viral in the world, saying that what Israel was doing to Gaza was the same as Hitler was doing to the Jews during Second World War in Germany. So this was really one of the worst statements Lula could ever have done, and he is now persona non grata in Israel by the Israeli government. Hamas, the terrorist group, had also a partnership, a cooperation with the MST in Brazil, which is the you could call them, I don't know would be the right translation to English, but it's like the people who don't have a land movement, they call it, like people who, are fighting for having a piece of land to plant, to work agriculture. So they have but it's actually more kind of a militia of the PT, and they have a cooperation with Hamas in Gaza. So when you look at it, like you're saying, there is an international network. Lula was together with Fidel Castro, the founder of the São Paulo Forum, and the São Paulo Forum is a cooperation or a coordination of all leftist movements in the Americas that come from parties like a PT, the communist parties, to also militias and groups as the FARC, the ELN in Chile, and so on. So they are international, they act international, and they protect themselves internationally too.
Okay. So can I bump back to your specific story?
Mm-hmm.
Take me from you're going through all this persecution. It's not hard to imagine that you might end up arrested, convicted. Given even in this conversation, you've had to tread the line awfully carefully, as you've explained. Is this how far is this more of? If Bolsonaro comes back, does this mean that the war is ended? What does the future look like? What's the next step for you?
We've been to Washington. I've been to the Inter-American Commission of of Human Rights. It's an organ of the OAS. We've been traveling also abroad, like I'm here in London and in other places, to raise concern about what's going on in Brazil, to talk about the situation, because I believe that most of the solution comes from abroad. There's a lot that we can do internally, of course. I think we have to continue to put more candidates on the right. We have to give formation to more people to explain what's going on inside the country, and that also passes through local elections. Even though Twitter was censored in Brazil during the election period, the right had way more candidates elected than the left. So this is already good news. We had many more mayors elected than the left had in Brazil in the last elections, and I think we're going to have much more in 2026. One of the things that we have to have is control over the Senate. So I'm candidate for the Senate in 2026 in my home state. I don't know if they will allow me, as I explained it to you, but that's my goal. So
when you say we, you mean the coalition of the right?
Yes. I think there's 81 senators, 31 are now in the opposition, but in the next elections, 54 seats will be renovated. So that's 2/3. If we have a majority of these 54 seats, that is 27, we will have a majority in the Senate too, that's 41, which is sufficient to open an impeachment procedure of a member of the Supreme Court, which will, again, better the relation between the powers, as we call it, because the Supreme Court has overreached its functions and it is now abusive. But internationally, as you're asking me, I think it's very important for me to speak up and to gather protection too, because yes, I can go back to Brazil and maybe they can seize my passport. They can, like they did to many others. The leader of the opposition of last year doesn't have a passport anymore. There's a senator without passport. There's a senator that has his bank accounts frozen. Yeah. And he tried in the US.
This is classic communism.
Yeah, and this senator that has his passport seized, he went to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights and asked for a precautionary measure against the Brazilian government to retrieve his passport, to have his passport back. And guess what? This guy said that they wouldn't give a precautionary measure to him. So we have also problems in the international system. The International Court of Human Rights right now, as far as I had been told, has 4 members on the left and 3 on the right, or 4 members that don't care about human rights for everybody, and 3 that are concerned with the situation in Brazil. So we have to change also the international for this specific example of the International Commission of Human Rights is a good example, because 50% of the subject of the OAS comes from the United States. So if Trump, and I think he will do that, if Trump puts pressure on this kind of organisms to do something about Brazil, unless they want to get, budget cuts, this will help us a lot too. So we have to continue doing this internationally and also inside Brazil. And I believe that, even though it's a difficult time, I think we will overcome it. I never imagined that I would be in this situation in Brazil. In 2009, I was living in Washington, studied in Georgetown, and we had lectures with ambassadors from many countries, but also from Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia. Venezuela at the time had Chavez. I think, and at that time, Lula was the president of Brazil. And I said, good God, that we don't have, the situation that Venezuelans, Bolivians, and Ecuadorians have in their country. 15 years later, we're in a similar situation, becoming Venezuela. So this is also a kind of a alert to everybody anywhere in the world, even in England. It's not that difficult to really have a tyrant or tyranny that takes off your freedoms and makes your country become a dictatorship. It's all going so fast in Brazil that we're seeing it with our own two eyes.
Yeah. So you were with Bolsonaro recently.
Yeah.
What's he make of this?
He's worried, in a sense, because he knows that the chances are greater that he's been put to jail than I am, because he's, in all this narrative they are creating of attempted coup d'etat, they put him as the great organizer of
He's
it.
the Hitler.
The head of it. That's what the federal police, our Brazilian Gestapo, is coming up with, as far as we are seeing the news on the media. And that's also another thing. There are many journalists who are contributing with it. I think this is not only sad but sick. I have many journalists in favor of censorship. Even some of the big newspapers in Brazil are still saying that the censorship during the elections of 2022 were important to prevent Bolsonaro to become president again. It's crazy.
Very principle that their entire careers are predicated on.
And I'm not talking about journalists or reporters who are normally more on the left side. I'm talking, for instance, of the editorial page of a newspaper big as Estadão, the Estado de São Paulo, one of the bigger newspapers of Brazil. This week, they justified, again, they were criticizing Alexandre de Moraes for a recent order. So they're starting to criticize some of his orders, some of his censorship. But in the same text, they cannot avoid complimenting what he did in 2022, because that was still excusable because Brazil was under the threat of a new Bolsonaro government, right? So this is a situation we have to face. But still, I think, I think that we will overcome this in Brazil, and the international experience had been showing, as in Trump in the United States and Bolsonaro maybe in Brazil now, that people are getting, very tired of all this oppression and censorship, and especially of the terrible management of the economy that it left us.
You don't have to look as far as North America. It's, of course, happening in Argentina with Javier Milei.
Exactly,
Argentina,
yeah.
as far as I know, my understanding of Brazil starts with football.
Yeah.
And so
Great.
Your greatest rivals, the Argentinians, are having this new period under Milei, and to the north, El Salvador, with Bukele. What do you make of these two political movements?
Very interesting. Bukele, in the sense of, security, public security as priority. It's always been like Latin America. Many countries in Latin America are very unsafe. Brazil is unsafe for many reasons too. Many people don't want to go visit Brazil because they, fear of being robbed in the streets. I think this is very sad. We have one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Rio de Janeiro is amazing, beautiful. I just met somebody here at Unheard that said that was in Rio de Janeiro and loved it. Yeah, so I hope more people go to Rio de Janeiro and other places in Brazil, like my state, Rio Grande do Sul. Yeah, right?
I've been to Manaus. I went for the World Cup when he hosted it, and I've played some shows there. It's a beautiful country.
It is beautiful. It's
beautiful
great.
People. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Good music, too.
Great music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I hope more people go, especially now that we see all this change, like in Bukele's country, El Salvador, right, with less crime and so on. Brazil, we have a little bit of different trend also because of the, leftist government we have there. But still, I think this is good news when you see that some countries are dealing with corruption and criminality like is going on in El Salvador right now under Bukele. And with Milei specifically, I mean, the way he's dealing with it, so courageous and going against the unions and everything, is very motivating for us. Of course, we have to wait a little bit more to see if he can recover Argentinian economy that had been ruined by the socialists and inflation on the heights and so on. And also regarding human rights, there's a big test going on now with Argentina because we have almost 400 Brazilians from the January 8th events that had been either convicted to 17 or 18 years in jail or who are still under this unlawful prosecution who are now in Argentina. So they took shelter there. They are now under political asylum. But Justice Alexandre de Moraes has ordered their imprisonment in Argentina. So now we're going to see what is going to happen with Milei, and soon enough we're going to see some clash going on between him and Lula regarding this situation too. And I hope and I think he will. I hope he's on the side of human rights and and defending the right of these people to stay in his country, because if they have political asylum, nobody can put them in jail in Brazil.
Presumably it would be a good look for him to give them asylum.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, particularly against the socialists whom he hates so much.
Exactly, and a very bad look for Lula.
Very bad look for Lula. So there's hope then in the likes of Milei? Is Bolsonaro the Milei, or do you need are you the Milei?
There are some people asking me to go a step beyond and becoming a senator in the next election. I won't say that this is not going on right now, also because I am one of the few that is being so vocal against all abuses of authority in Brazil. But my plan is to become a senator next election, and I'm working hard for this because I really think that the key to change Brazil now is to have a majority in the Senate. And if Bolsonaro can run in the next election, I think that the right should unite around him, because he's the guy who still has, as I told you in the beginning, like the popularity to gather people in the streets and to bring everybody around him. He's not exactly as Milei, that's right. He's not an economist as Milei. He's not a libertarian in the sense, that Milei is. He's less statist than he was in the past. That is also true. Bolsonaro is a member of the military that in the past had been advocating for more for raise in the paychecks of members of the military in Brazil, and not that much interested in other themes. But more recently has changed that. That's good. But he's, as Milei is, as Trump is, representing many, many people who are completely dissatisfied with establishment, with corruption, and with everything that is going on in Brazil now on the left, and also with the economy. If Bolsonaro cannot run, well, that's a whole different story. And as I told you, right now he cannot run. So he's still campaigning. He's still, hopeful that he will be able to be the candidate in 2026. But if he cannot, then we have to work another name, and we have to have Bolsonaro support.
Okay. Well, look, we've talked a lot about politicians and the kind of what's going on the judicial level and the political level. But one thing I've noticed when looking at Brazil, what I see is these incredible videos of vast crowds, usually all wearing the green and gold football shirt. It seems that this is a real people's movement. And that energy is just astonishing. We haven't had that sort of, even though we have terrible free speech situations in this country, in America, we haven't had the response from the people quite like the Brazilians. So it seems like they're awake to what's going on.
Definitely. And that is my great hope. I mean, if there is something that can really change the situation, is multitudes gathering in the streets, many people taking to the streets to oppose Lula. And this is why January 8th was so important for Lula too, because in the end, with these very sad events, many people have been fearful, afraid of going to the streets or taking to the streets because they don't want to face, jail time. They don't want to be put in jail. They don't want to be persecuted. But still, even though this is all happening in Brazil in September 7th last, also in February this year, we had big demonstrations in Brazil, and they started in 2013. All this new wave of demonstrations is actually prior to Bolsonaro being even a national leader. He, as we say in Portuguese, he surfed that moment, right? He took advantage of it very intelligently. He became a national leader together with these events. He started to take part in the demonstrations against Dilma Rousseff and Lula, of course, and his party in 2014, 15, 16. But it all started in 2013. And what ignited it was social media. Without social media, there was never a possibility, a chance that Brazilian people would gather as they did in the last 10 years. And that is why they want to censor us so much. This is why they hate social media, because they know social media has this impact on people for organization, and social media breaks the traditional media and the traditional forms of power that we have in Brazil.
Yeah, and gives it back to the people.
Yes.
Congressman Van Hattem, thank you so much for your time. We've covered so much. I feel like I've got a really great introduction and scope of what's going on in the great country of Brazil, the once and future great country, Brazil. I hope that it'll rise again. I'm sorry for this unbelievable tyranny. It beggars belief that what you're going through. I know we've covered so much. Before we bring it to close, is there any loose ends that worth tying up? Anything that perhaps you wanted to mention that we might have missed over in this conversation?
No, I loved it. Thanks so much. And I had the opportunity to live abroad for some years. I lived in the Netherlands. I lived in Denmark. I also lived before that in the United States, but that was shorter. And during that period of life when I was living here in Europe, I was actually quite content. I was working first in the Dutch government, then I started the business, and I started to see how life living in freedom really, as much as we criticize what's going on in Europe, there's much better situation here than many other countries in the world, and also in Brazil regarding several aspects, public security, for instance. So living in freedom, working and being able to walk on the streets, less bureaucracy, and so on. So at that time, 2 years of my life living here, I started to see how it was, to have this kind of life, but I wanted this to happen in Brazil too. And when I returned to Brazil, many people asked me, why are you coming here if you could have stayed abroad, if you could, live in Netherlands, even though the weather is not that good, of course. And I would say, because I don't want to live in another country. I want to live in another Brazil. But living in another Brazil means that I have to take responsibility for changing my country. It's my country. So this is something that I would like to say to everybody. And this goes for Brazilians, goes for Englishmen, goes for everybody. If you want to change things, if you're unsatisfied, go do something, right? Go and gather with other people. If you're just complaining, you won't help much. Yeah. So maybe this is the last message. I'm doing it because I feel that I can help. I'm in a position that I would never expect one day to be. And I'm very happy to be here and have your help too, because you're for sure helping us and a lot with this interview.
Yeah, you're a patriot and you're duty bound, and it's wonderful to speak with you. I'll ask one last positive question, which I ask.
Of course.
I actually ask a lot of my British guests, what is it to be British? What is it to be English? And it's an interesting question in the era of globalization versus sovereignty.
Sure.
So what does it mean to be a Brazilian?
Oh, very good question. Never got that one. I think it is to be constantly motivated, constantly believing in a better future. We are a very positive people who have, a great hospitality. You've been there, so we hug everybody. We invite everybody home. We have our problems. We have, of course, many issues to solve, but Brazilian people are creative, and I think that is a lot of what it means to Brazilian, really, to be a happy people that deserves to be happy, not to have this kind of government that we have right now.
On that note, Congressman, thank you so much for your time. I know it's precious, and I hope we can do this again. Godspeed. Good luck to you fighting the anti-free speech demons of Brazil.
Thank you so much. Congratulations on your work. I hope to be here again soon.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show with Congressman Marcel van Hattem. If you want to support this show, all you have to do is press like and subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Marcel van Hattem exploring the issues that you at home want to hear about and the mainstream media won't touch. But until next time, be well.